I'm good. Did you miss me?
I did a lot. A lot.
I really don't want to get your channel deleted, Reed. That you're asking for serious trouble if I answer that question.
Well, then stop fucking talking about us, man.
How much perceived value do you think we will lose?
Well, I mean, we lose a lot.
The establishment Republicans are not Republican in name only. That's what the GOP is.
So many people want everyone else to come to libertarianism the same way they did.
But the slave mentality is praised.
All right. Thanks,
I want
Mike.
your phone to blow up with notifications every time the show is on. Thank you, Reed.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for watching another episode of The Naturalist Capitalist. Before you do anything else, I want you to go look at the description of the video. Right at the top, I have a link to my Odyssey page. I want you to go subscribe to me there. I think I only had like a couple hundred subscribers a little while ago. I'm over 500 now, so people are actually moving over there. That's great. As you know, I had a YouTube video removed the other day. I'm gone from Twitter. They can basically erase me if they want, so I'm trying to expand my portfolio. So when I do get removed from every mainstream platform, you still know where to find me. But I'm not going to stop talking about the stuff I've been talking about. That's one option that is completely off the table. So if you guys want the pure, uncut truth, or at least the pure, uncut opinion, not all of it's necessarily truth, as we'll get into tonight, then follow me over there. So we got an interesting roundtable discussion tonight. We've got two atheists and two Christians. We're all good friends. And we all want to see the liberty movement move forward in a united manner. And this religion issue has kind of become a hot topic lately. So I'll bring these guys in one at a time. We got my friend Wil Bell
Hey,
from
Reed.
Southern Georgia. How you doing, Will?
Doing great, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for coming on, man. So we've got the two atheists. I thought this would be a little ironic to have us hovering above the Christians, just, for a little comedic irony. But we'll bring the Christians in now. We got Liam McCollum. How you doing, Liam?
Good. How's Twitter purgatory?
It's nice missing the drama, but at the same time, like, not everything that happens on there is drama. So I kind of miss out on interacting with people, and that's kind of fun. So I have to call you guys more. So maybe that's good. I actually have to pick up my phone and talk to a human instead of tweeting at somebody.
A little bit of a detox, probably.
Yeah, for sure. And we have the amazing Jacob Winograd, or Jacob Daniel, or I'm so confused what this guy's name is, because his first name's Daniel sometimes, now his last name's Daniel. I'm just like completely confused. I have no idea what's going on. How you doing?
Doing good. And, I don't think you can call yourself a naturalist anymore because you're a ghost. So you're now the supernaturalist. You don't exist on Twitter.
That's true. I also can't really own private property if I'm a ghost, right? So maybe I'm a communist also. So maybe now I'm the supernaturalist communist. I don't know if that's how that works.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll consult my eschatology manuals tonight and get back to you.
Great. Yeah, I want to know the answer to that. So, like I said, the four of us have gotten along. I've had all you guys on the show before, and I think we're all pretty like-minded in the direction we want to see the liberty movement and libertarian party go. And there's been this sectarian divide taking place, or I don't even know if there's a divide taking place, but there are some people who want a sectarian divide to take place. And I think it's just the dumbest thing ever right now. I mean, because I feel like, we need as many people on board as we can get. We need as many people united in this fight as we can have. And if we're going to let hypotheticals that we don't even know the solid answer to divide us, when there are very obvious real things happening in front of us that we can all agree need to stop, it seems like a complete waste of time to argue about this, or I mean, not a waste of time to argue about it, because I think it's an important discussion, but to let it drive us apart and turn us into enemies. So most people know my opinion on all this stuff, but I figured I'd go through each one of you and just let you explain your position and then what you think of this situation that's going on. So Will, why don't you go first?
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself.
we're all in the Mises Caucus, right? Right. And so, yeah, I've been a libertarian for over a decade. Never been involved in the party, never put out any kind of content or any kind of stuff like that. But, you know, in the past year, I've gotten motivated, joined, you know, state national party. Here we are, joined the Mises Caucus, got ready. And now, you know, a lot of the dudes that kind of got us here are starting to say it's lame and we should be all turning back into Republicans. I don't know. It's disheartening to me to see that happen, because we got what we call the Lulberts and all these guys that we've really kind of seems like we've beaten them and are taking the party from them. Not that it's over yet, but like a lot of the guys that are, I don't know, seem to be on our side are just kind of wanting to celebrate Ron DeSantis and all that kind of jazz. I don't know. How do you guys feel about that?
I
could rant all day.
Yeah, I share the same sentiment. I actually just had your husband, Clint, on the show, and he was telling me that, I mean, the whole argument about specifically the NAP is just ridiculous, because they're already aggressing on us. So that question's kind of out the window. But regarding the topic of the NAP, it seems like we're debating whether or not we take the agorist route, and there's kind of like this weird caricature that people who are in the LP don't believe that we should enter politics or use politics as a means to achieve liberty. But that point already seems debated. Like now we're just talking about the GOP versus the LP and which one is more effective. And then we start to like have all of these distractions about things that don't really seem to matter at this point. Like, they're already aggressing on us. The question is just whether or not the Libertarian Party is the best way to do it, whether or not localism is the best way to do it. And I mean, the people who are in the GOP Mises Caucus and the people who are in the LP Mises Caucus, they already grant that agorism isn't the solution. That's why they're in the LP. That's why they're in a party. And I just think it's pretty ridiculous. Why not both? Why not? My stance is we want liberty. I'm not here promoting the Libertarian Party for the Libertarian Party's sake. I just want to achieve liberty. And if the Libertarian Party can't do it, then we'll go somewhere else. But I happen to think that we can do something here.
I laughed when you said why not both, Liam, because I literally have an episode I released last month called Why Not Both? Because I'm so sick of, I mean, the post-libertarians and the agorists who are taking shots at us. And I'm just like, listen, I really don't see the divide that a lot of these people see, both in the context of like the topic of Christianity and atheism, or really just like whatever your religious views. Like, I don't think that we need to be gatekeeping around those things. And then when it comes to strategy, it's like, you know, I don't have to like autistically just like pick one. It's like, you know, I can invest in Bitcoin and grow a garden and engage in counter economics and be in the Mises Caucus. And, you know, there's actually a synergistic compatibility between decentralization and nullification and like mass non-compliance and agorism. So, I mean, now I'm not, you know, ignorant to like the original agorist writers and thinkers and the fact that they were anti-political. But I mean, again, these are just ideas that we're exploring and building upon over time. And, you know, especially as a Christian, it's like the only views I take religiously are my religious views. Other than that, everything else, you know, those are ideas that can be, you know, built upon. And just because it's like some people, it's weird, especially like some people who are friends of mine who I respect, who are agorists, and then they're also atheists, but they've kind of turned agorism into their religion. And I think that kind of ties into the topic we're talking about right now, which is it feels like sometimes that it's not Christians versus atheists. It's people who are these weird, like hyper religious Gnostic types versus a lot of us who are a lot more, at least temperamentally agnostic. Like, even though I'm a Christian, I'm not super like autistic or like in people's face about my beliefs. And like my religious beliefs are more personal than they are like I need to go around and browbeat people about them. So I guess that's my opening remarks.
Yeah, and there's a point in the comments about whether or not someone in the post-libertarian crowd actually mentioned agorism, but there seems to be this sentiment that we need to, grab state power, whether or not that's local, whether or not that's national, to fight state power. And I'm just saying, like, to a certain extent, maybe you don't think the LP is going far enough with that, but the people in the LP already gain local power. They want to take over their local government to reduce government power and promote liberty in their hometown or whatever. So I just think that the discussion then just becomes whether or not we enter the GOP and the LP, and I think it depends on location.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, it's hard, like, in the same way that, like, as libertarians, we don't go around trying to pretend that, like, we can know what's best for somebody else. Like, this is why central planning works. I mean, doesn't work, sorry. This is why central planning fails, and
right,
why,
I'm taking Jacob off the stream. He's done.
This is why, we're all like Mises guys. We're all Austrian economists, and it's like, the idea, value is subjective, and in the diverse marketplace, and everything is economics, everything is the market, and that includes political activism or liberty activism. Those are subject to market forces, just like anything that's human action is economics and subject to market forces. There's going to be a division of labor, and you're going to have to, like, decide what's best for you and where you're at. But for me to, like, look at people in Florida and pretend like I know exactly what people in Florida should do while I'm here in Pennsylvania is just retarded. You know what I mean? Now, I mean, that doesn't mean that we can't have a conversation, but it means that I should approach the conversation with my friends who are in Florida with, like, a humility and an understanding that, like, I'm an outsider looking in. And it's just kind of like, if a friend asks me for advice on his life or a hard thing, I can give him advice, but, like, I'm not literally in his shoes and I'm not him. So, you know what I mean? We're all going to have different preferences, and we have to stop, trying to, I think some of us are, bringing in statist baggage into the liberty movement, where, like, we are so used to maybe, like, duopoly style politics where everyone is kind of cookie cutter and does the same thing. But that's not how libertarians should be.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, it's not the atheists versus the Christians, it's the annoying Gnostic types versus the agnostics. That also goes for libertarians versus liberty Republicans and agorists, which is it's basically what you just laid out, but that also could be described as Gnostic versus agnostic, because if you're agnostic, you're not really aware of what's going to work best in a different location than yours with different people. Like in Utah, we have a huge third party opening in 2016. Hillary Clinton barely beat the independent candidate, not Gary Johnson, but I forget what his name was, but he was the independent candidate for president. She barely beat him. And there's a lot of people who are disgruntled with the extreme social conservatism of the Republicans, but they're also not socialists or neoliberals. So there's a big opening for the Libertarian Party there. Maybe in Florida, that's not the same, or Texas. I don't know. It depends on your state. It really depends on your county or your town, even. I mean, if you're going for really local positions. So I think you're right that trying to dictate one way that everyone should attack this, which is something I've been guilty of in the past. I mean, a year ago,
me too. Yeah,
I was totally like, everybody leave the Republican Party, fuck them, they suck, like join the Libertarian Party. I've matured out of that because I've realized that's just not realistic, and it's not the best course of action for every single municipality or state or town or city or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I had Jeremy Kauffman on my podcast, and I think you did too, Reed. And, like up in New Hampshire, the Republican Party is a lot different than the Republican Party here in my state of PA. So it's like, I think it's one of those things where it's like, I think in a general sense, most of the time, I'm going to say the LP, and specifically the LPMC route, makes more sense than a GOP route. But I can't, like, it would just be really autistic to be like, in 100% of cases, in all counties, in all states, for every individual, that's the right answer. Like even if it might be 90% of the time that it's the right answer, but there's still going to be those exceptions, and we have to, like keep that in mind and allow people to, again, like we can't centrally plan liberty, and we can't centrally plan anything in the market, and that includes political activism.
Yeah.
So we brought up Florida earlier, and goes, DeSantis is on everybody's. I keep saying his name weird, but
you're a Southern, I'll give you a pass.
Yeah.
We're all Northerners here, so.
What are y'all's thoughts on him specifically, and how? Not necessarily like. I think
he's a corny grifter.
Yeah, I'm with you.
He does have interesting things to say, though. Occasionally,
Occasionally, sure. And I mean,
just like you, Reed. No.
Yeah.
But like, do y'all think like people in the Libertarian Party should not be focused on Florida because of him, because of the COVID things that we're going through? I mean, here in Georgia, my governor Kemp, he's from my perspective, he's been just as good on COVID as DeSantis, and he doesn't have all the baggage of being like a lawyer that operated in Guantanamo Bay, and he's not like a stooge I'm sure he's a stooge for Israel. He's a Republican, but he's not as much of a stooge as DeSantis. And I don't know. And like here in Georgia, we got Shane Hazel kind of gearing up for a governor run against a Republican that's just as good on COVID as our Florida guy, but not as crazy from my perspective. Now, he was pointing guns at teenagers in his political ads and stuff, but I don't know. What are y'all's thoughts on that whole?
I don't give a shit about DeSantis because he's not my governor. I don't understand the hype around him in general either way. Like, I think he's a mediocre person on the issues, but he took the national stage on a really important issue and was right about it. But I don't know why all that attention goes to him. Like, Kristi Noem never shut down South Dakota. And like you said, there's a lot of other governors who reopened just about as quickly as he did. For some reason, he ended up being the one where the spotlight was on. But I just don't get the hype around him in general. I don't think he's like the worst thing in the world. And I also don't think he's like, the coolest thing since sliced bread. I just don't really get it. I mean, if I were in Florida, I probably wouldn't vote for him for governor. But I don't know. Like, if you're like, I can understand why people would too. I mean, it depends on who the opposition is. But I mean, I've got a similar governor to DeSantis here in Utah. He's more of a, I don't know. He's not as outspoken or eloquent or defiant, but when it comes down to being against Biden's mandates, he's pretty much on the same level. But I'm probably not going to vote for him. I'll probably vote for the libertarian candidate. So I don't know. I mean, I think I can understand why people would vote for him, if they look around at other states. And Florida is one of those states that's not like a deep red state. It could go either way. What I think would be ironic is if a Democrat does win, and then all the powers that DeSantis has given to the police during his time as governor, those could be really turned around on the public and used against them. And I think that would really blow up in their faces as far as the whole idea of trying to make the state work for you instead of, dismantling it while you're in charge. But
that's the case with everything. Like everything one side does, the other side gets in power and does it to, vice versa. And it just, I don't know. I feel like the post-libertarian cats are like, they're becoming so pragmatic that they're just, I don't know, they're becoming normies. I don't know.
I've never seen a group of people talk about time preference so much without understanding time preference. Like, just to be frank. And it's like, I have respect for a lot of those guys. And it's weird because like a lot of the more philosophical elements of like the post-libertarian crowd, I have some sympathies to. But then when they get to like the actual praxis or like what their strategy is. It's just like, wait, you guys just like waned philosophical for 2 hours to come up with yet another way to explain why we should give the GOP another try, which is to me just as autistic as like, guys, 20 more years until we flatten the war on terror. You know what I mean? It's like, how many times can you try the same thing, just rebrand it a little differently and think it's going to work? Now, when I said like there's probably exceptions to the LP, it's like I think those are short-term exceptions, because I think there's no, the problem, like again, going back to time preference, there's no long-term strategy or future with GOP activism. Like, you're not going to change the GOP. You're not going to change that from what it is, because it's fundamentally owned by corporate interests. Whereas with the LP and the LPMC, like if you're going to make the argument for political activism at all, you have to have some kind of long-term vision. So, you know, I think that with the LP and the LPMC, we're building something that we can fight those short-term battles, but that energy goes towards a long-term vision and culture, and it's building that culture and that movement again, like that Ron Paul 2.0 movement, and that is something that can sustain you into the future. Whereas I just don't see, like, again, like some of the ideas of guys like Andrew at Popular Liberty, they aren't bad ideas in terms of like, oh, that's something you can do in the here and now to help. But I wouldn't do those things and build up camp and try to build a roots in the GOP, which has shown itself to be thoroughly allergic to any kind of like liberty movement that tries to build up within. I mean, we see what they did to Ron Paul. We see what they did to the Tea Party. I have respect for Rand Paul and Massey, but like, I mean, other than standing up to the COVID regime and being a good voice, for liberty, I guess, what have they accomplished politically? Not much. And I think that post-libertarians don't understand local politics, because there's the power at Washington. So they always talk about power, right? And it's like, there's a lot of power in the GOP when it comes to like Washington and stuff like that. But when it comes to local politics, your local GOP affiliates are pretty much non-factors. I mean, they don't really do anything. They once every 4 years hand out, yard signs and bumper stickers and help people get registered to vote in the primary elections. They don't do anything other than that. In a lot of cases, your local LP affiliates actually have more structure and are able to wield more power. It's not that hard as people think it is to win at the local level under the LP banner. So I think the post-libertarians are just confused. I mean, some of them are smart. Like, I don't think they're dumb people. I just think that they're possessed, like they're being possessed by high time preference energy is how I would categorize it.
Yeah, I think the post-libertarian kind of argument aside, it's still focusing on DeSantis can be a little myopic, and I wonder if the reason that he has hit the national stage is because, I mean, the corporate press is focusing on him so much that the clash becomes DeSantis versus Trump if they're trying to manufacture something like that. If I was in Florida, I would want DeSantis to stay as my governor, because I mean, at that point, he has no authority over foreign policy. He can protect the National Guard if you can force him to, and really, I mean, he can continue to do what he's doing and strengthen, I guess, at least local power to combat national power, which I think post-libertarians accept. And I don't really understand why that is necessarily something extra libertarian, like why that goes beyond libertarian. I think we can all admit that local power and strengthening local power to take away power from the national government is closer to the individual. And that's kind of what we're trying to do in Montana. Like Montana, Angela McCardle actually tweeted this out today. Montana has stricter laws against vaccine mandates than Florida does. And I mean, this goes to the idea that they're focusing on DeSantis when they could focus on governors like Gianforte. I don't really understand it either. Maybe he doesn't have political aspirations in the same way, but
yeah, no, I've totally. I mean, I did a whole stream with Clint about this, and for some reason, it blew up when DeSantis did the anti-mandate mandates a couple months ago. And I was like, why? He's not the first governor to do this. He's not the only governor to do this. I just didn't get why that became such a flashpoint. I wanted to say with the post-libertarians, like they're not a monolith either. Like they don't all think the same thing. I've had Pete on. I've had Andrew from Popular Liberty on. I actually just did a stream on Tommy Salmon's show with Adam Patrick, who he doesn't really call himself a post-libertarian, but he knows them very well. And, you know, so it's not like they're all thinking the exact same thing and all saying the exact same thing. I will say about Andrew from Popular Liberty that I really like the way he approaches a lot of it, which is take over your town. And he has this whole idea, archotropism and the anti-tax, which, you know, the anti-tax is based off of a sovereign wealth fund that you would basically have the governor own capital and then invest that capital in stocks and diversify it really well so that wealth fund continues to grow or at least stay the same size. So you have a zero tax government that can just run off that sovereign wealth fund. And if you do that from extremely decentralized, localized areas, I think that's really smart. What I don't get is there's this big push for localism, but then a lot of these guys are always talking about DeSantis and Trump and like congressional people like Matt Gaetz, or, you know, it's just like, okay, wait, if we're supposed to be focusing locally, we shouldn't care about this. You know, then they also complain about, I'm not even going to say the words because this video will get banned, but the, you know, something that happened last year that it wasn't recorded correctly. You know, like talking about that type of stuff. It's like, who cares about any of that if the goal is local? Like if it's all local, let's just keep the conversation centered on local elections, local things. Like I don't understand what the greater GOP has to do with anything, I guess. That's my biggest critique of them, I'd say.
I agree with you. And while we're talking about localization, a lot of these guys seem to have a real hatred towards secularism. Wondering how you guys feel on, like, to me, secularism is kind of a must when we're talking about how the government operates. Like, I think y'all agree. Of course, it just seems like obviously we don't want any kind of religious beliefs dictating government policy, even if it's, say, our own, because it's all subjective to who's interpreting that belief. And it gets really hard to make these kind of arguments. And it does seem like a lot of these guys are really just almost wanting localization to just kind of like have more church authority in our communities. It scares the hell out of me because I'm down here in the South, and if the higher up government's like dissolved, which I kind of the belief that I don't think they're gonna. I think us waiting on this collapse is just gonna be, they're just gonna stretch it out for our whole lives. It'll be a slow decline, and I would like us to focus on fixing like it in the way that we can, in whatever ways we can, and especially like in the route of like agorism and focusing on localization and how we can fix it. But our whole monetary system's tied into the federal government, so we have to focus on that. Like, and I know like our entire lives there's been no success as far as that goes, but we're still tied into that unless we all like somehow can absolve legal tender laws and start working off Bitcoin and gold to trade stuff with our neighbors and such. But I guess I'm kind of ranting here. The main thing I want to know is like, what is y'all's thoughts on like secularism and localization and all that jazz?
Well, I'll take a first crack at it. So obviously I'm an anarchist fundamentally, so I don't want any state, and if a state's going to exist, I want it to be as small as possible. And in the vein of thought, and actually it was funny, like I had this conversation with Spike Cohen last night on my podcast, but like, if I don't want a state to infringe upon my right to practice my faith, I have to advocate for a state in the here and now, as long as we have one, that at the same time doesn't force my beliefs on other people. So if you're going to call secularization the idea that like there's a separation between church and state, and the state can't mandate a religion or force beliefs on people or something like that, then I'm in agreement with you. I will say I'm not as much of a fan of the secularization of our society from a more cultural perspective, because I actually think, and this is where, like I was saying, as much as I have a lot of stark political disagreements with the post-libertarians, the philosophical things, I'm a bit more sympathetic to them. And I actually had this conversation with Pete Quinones on my show after he corrected my pronunciation of his name, which Reed was there to watch.
Pete,
but,
I kind of like that. That was fitting.
But I kind of think that to a certain extent, and I certainly I'm painting with broad brushes here, because I know a lot of atheists and people who are very unreligious who are good libertarians. But I think in a general, societal sense, as the culture has abandoned religion and abandoned Christian values, I think they've replaced that God with a different religion and God. They haven't just become like secular in the sense that like they're just all rationalism and reason and what have you. They've just replaced a religion that's thousands of years old, that had some kind of limits to it at least, with a new religion, which is just basically like the cathedral, you know what I mean? Which is statism, which is, everything we're dealing with right now. There's a reason why a lot of socialists and communists hated Christianity, because they knew as long as there was a part of the population that was religious and viewed God as the ultimate sovereign authority, it would be hard to push state power past a certain point, because as the state would grab power into certain realms and spheres, people would go, well, that's not your right to do. Those are things that, only God can do. But as society has abandoned God, it's been easier, I think, for states to grab power. So, there's that's a little bit of it. And so that's kind of where I agree with you on one hand, but disagree with you on the other.
I can respect that. But like, I agree with you that religion of all different shapes and sizes can be like a safeguard against like an overreaching government, because as people have their own authorities that they've set up voluntarily and such. Definitely a positive. One thing, so like a lot of the post-libertarians and like kind of you and what you were saying right there, what problems do you see with our society that you could tie directly to like disbelief in God, or just maybe even like non-organized religion, like just kind of like rejecting that? To me, I definitely like am very much of a libertine. I see in like I guess I'm a shade of like a progressive in the way that I think that our society is progressing out of the need for religion and stuff. Our rational minds are taking over more. Now we got growing pains, and what you say about people like embracing state action, I see it, especially in people that don't have any beliefs outside the material world. It's easy to kind of latch on to this some sort of authority to answer our problems when we don't have anything. But like you guys know Reed well, and y'all starting to know me. Like me and him, we're anarchists. We embrace liberty and all that stuff. But I get kind of triggered when we start going like, when Christians. I was raised Christian, so I mean, like I know where y'all are coming from, but we tie morality with belief in God, Christ. Y'all understand kind of
Yeah,
where?
and I think I understand really well, and this is kind of how I actually got into libertarianism, was through a study of natural law, and I've kind of got into it through Aristotle, John Locke, and Aquinas. And the way, and I've talked to Reed about this, the way I really understand libertarianism is kind of through a natural law perspective. And I think, Reed, you might share this in the way that you have formatted your show as the naturalist capitalist. Like, there are these natural laws that exist, and we should let things naturally unfold. And something I would say is that I don't want, I honestly want you to understand nature, because I think that nature was created by God. So Aquinas would say that you can understand natural law without knowing God, and that in a way you are understanding a part of him, and he would say that would actually lead you to God. I think I'm too humble to say that, but in the way that I would say that you, if you were to say that you believe in the law of gravity and all of these scientific laws, I think that your observations of nature is something that you're trying to acquire truth, and I believe that Jesus is truth. So I wouldn't say that you aren't a libertarian in that way if you grant that life, liberty, and property are necessary things, because I think that you've grasped onto truth, and I don't know. I just think that the way that we're conceiving of libertarianism is, a lot of people are making a god out of it, in the way that they say that you shouldn't be grasping onto it as an atheist. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm just playing with these ideas right now.
No, I feel you, man. And like, maybe like the God that I've chosen to replace God when I rejected Christianity is maybe it is liberty, but like that's kind of my focus. Like, I kind of have a religious belief that humankind can live like kind of like in a peaceful manner. Like, we can structure society as peacefully as possible, and I think human nature is getting better as we grow smarter and learn more and become more empathetic. Now, a lot of that empathy for the past 2,000 years was taught through the teachings of Christianity. And a lot of that built the society that we're around, we are, products of. But that goes both ways. It's not just the good aspects of our society, it's also the bad aspects of our society. And I think there's like stuff we can leave in the past, and stuff we can maybe like progress into the future more so. I don't know. It's hard for me to, like, when we talk about like the non-aggression principle, to me that would be like, if you follow that would be a moral law. Like, you're not hurting anybody. Hey, that's simple. But sometimes religious belief could bring you to a point where you have to reject that moral law. So,
Can you kind of give an example of what you mean there?
All right, say God tells you to carry your son up to a mountain and kill him.
Oh gosh. Well, he would never do that. Wait. Oh, sorry, I know what you're quoting there. I would, if God told me to carry my son up to the mountain to sacrifice him, I would do exactly what Abraham did, because I think the actual answer is that Abraham had faith that his son was not going to die, or that somehow something was going to happen. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he trusted that God was good to the point where he was willing to obey God even when it made absolutely no sense, and that's why God like obviously intervened. Like God didn't actually tell Abraham to follow through and actually kill his son. He was
I
like,
just want to say, if God told me to take top lobster up on top of a mountain and kill him, I would do it.
well, yeah, I would help you. I mean, you know, we might actually not. God's like, stop, and we're like, oh, oops, you were a second too
sorry,
late, God.
my bad, too slow.
But yeah, so I mean, that's my answer to that. Is that, you know, my conception of God is that God is good. And that, you know, in the same way that like we were talking about time preference, you know, and then like as humans, it's very hard for us to judge things and act in a low time preference fashion. We're not really evolved to do that. I mean, we're better at it than a lot of other animals, but we still suck at it. We're very reactionary. We act on impulses.
Do you think we're getting better at it, at the ability to do that?
I don't know, man. Like in some ways, yes, but then like when I like with social media and Twitter and other things, it's like, in some ways not.
I don't know, man. Like social media and the internet to me was enlightenment. I'd be fucking wearing a Confederate flag hat and riding my four-wheelers around, you know, and no hate towards that, but like to me, when I was a teenager, I got the internet, and it was kind of like, and social media, and I was able to meet all you guys up to this point. Like there's negatives that come with it because a bunch of people are just yelling at the void, trying to figure it out. But I'm pretty firm, and I think that like social media has been a positive. Like we'd all be watching CNN still if it wasn't for the internet. I mean, there's this kind of feeling in the liberty movement that they just want to throw all the progress of society away because they see a gay pride parade. And it's fucking crazy to me that libertarians are focusing on gay pride parades and stuff, and porn and people smoking weed. It kind of pisses me off that they're going to reject other people's liberty, like, and they want to embrace it for themselves because I don't know if it's been the COVID year that's broke them or whatever, but it seems like it. And now they're getting a little rowdy on the Machiavellian type talk. Like,
I really share that sentiment about the post-libertarian talk too, because there are elements of it that I actually really agree with when it comes to recognizing that there's like a sin problem and stuff like that, but that seems completely out of the character. Like libertarianism speaks nothing on cultural views. It speaks entirely politically. So if I say that I'm a libertarian, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be a libertine. Like I can be a Christian and a libertarian.
Right. The greatest libertarian.
Yeah.
Right there. That's the man. He's the man that never really said anything embarrassing. That's the guy that got me here. I'm sure through some way he got y'all all here. He's a good Christian doctor, and a lot of libertarians, and a lot of people, most people in our country are Christian, I would say. And that means a lot of really great people are Christian, and a lot of my family, most of my family and friends and neighbors are all Christian, and I have no ill will towards like that or think that I know better than anybody else. I'm very agnostic on life and reality, where we're at. I don't think you have to be libertine, and I think you agree with me that it's like we just got to all accept everybody's libertarianism or their libertinist, or however you would say it.
I would say we have
vices or whatever. Like they got to be able to do what they want as long as they're not aggressing upon people.
I would say we have to tolerate them. We don't have to accept them. Like,
sure, absolutely.
very
Yeah, I was
big.
going to say, this is something Reed and I have talked about in our discussions, where it's like, as a libertarian, I have to, like Reed said, tolerate that people are going to do certain things and go, well, that's not an act of aggression, so I'm not going to advocate for a law or some kind of state agency to uh, attack them or go after them for that thing I disagree with them on. But I don't have to celebrate it. You know what I mean? And so I think the like, because I share a lot of, like, we all kind of here seem to agree on the fatal flaws of like the post-libertarian movement, or whatever you want to call it. And I think they get a little bit carried away, but I do think, and it's hard to explain, but there's something about that I think that they are correct on when they're talking about, like, uh there are certain behaviors, or it's not even like certain, like, it's sort of like we're looking at behaviors at like the end goal, like, oh, somebody watching porn, or somebody who is gay or trans or whatever, and you're like, okay, at the end goal, this one action in isolation, is this bad? Is this something that people should be getting upset about or outraged about? And the answer is pretty much no. Like, it's kind of not, like, especially compared to a lot of the evil shit in the world. Like, for me to get like really up in arms and enraged about two gay people living together, or someone watching porn in their basement, when there's like a genocide in Yemen and we have the world's biggest prison population in America, yeah, it's sort of silly. On the other hand, there is something about the non-Christian secular culture that, like, there's a connection between the growing power of the state, especially how fervently, like, the left especially seems to have come to worship the state and the growth of the state power, and the state influencing culture. And with this sort of like, if you guys ever read like Brave New World, it's sort of like kind of what I'm referencing is like this, when you've like a lot of what I see in secular culture, and again, I'm painting with broad brushes here, like, and because I kind of have to for the sake of conversation. I recognize there's a lot of individual examples, and I can't judge every individual secular person or atheist by what I see as far as like the general truth, but I do think it's a general truth as far as a majority of what happens in secular culture is that it leans towards this very hedonistic, pleasure-seeking, hyper-rationalist culture that I don't like. That I think, again, when you analyze it at the level of just individual actions, it's hard to see the problem. But when you kind of take the more bird's eye view and you look at the fact, like, well, it's not really conducive to get people oriented towards libertarian thinking, which is very low time preference, by promoting a culture that has them constantly engaging in pleasure-seeking hedonism that is getting their brains wired in a very high time preference fashion, where all they're thinking about is just the most immediate consequences of their actions. And from a religious perspective, I think, part of this too is that, like, a lot of people don't understand, like, again, from my Christian perspective, there are certain things in the Bible that God said were wrong, not because they hurt people, but because he knew that they're bad for us in the long term. And it's sometimes hard for us to see that. But I think some of the ways in which people have rejected God and religion and started to do those things that I view as sin more, we're seeing people reap what they sow. And I think, in my eyes, it's kind of like showing why those things, although it was wrong for Christians for hundreds of years and really thousands almost, to be using the state to enforce these moral ethics. Like, I certainly don't want to go back to theocracy. By no means do I want that. But, as libertarians, we reject the, like, false order that the state provides, because really the state is more of an agent of chaos than of order. Using coercion to make people comply is not what true order is. But, so we reject coercion, but we have to embrace personal responsibility, and we have to embrace self-imposed order, which means something that I think is a lot more compatible with Christian philosophy than it is like the hyper rationalist worldview.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, This reverts back to your original question, Will, which is, do you think the government should be secular if it exists? And I do think it should be. Just to answer your question, I think as long as there is a state, it should not impose or ban any religion. And I don't give a shit about "In God We Trust" being on the money, or like, who cares, whatever, that's fine. But I don't think they should be enforcing any religious ideology. But a lot of what we're talking about right now has nothing to do with the state. Like, I think a lot of the reasons that society is going downhill is actually because of technology and just like an increased influx of information that people don't know what to do with. So they end up, they end up rising to the top with all the shit that comes from mainstream media, and they just have lies pumped into their heads all the time. And like you said, Jacob, they're just constantly feeding whatever physical desire they have. But all these things have nothing to do with the government. And I think both like atheist, libertine, thin libertarians, and like some Christian maximalist, like post-libertarians, are making the same mistake, that a political ideology is going to fulfill your desires in life, or it's going to be a fulfilling philosophy to get you to the fullest of the human experience. I don't think that's the case. I think libertarianism is incredibly skeletal and minimalist. It's just like, it's basically like the 10 Commandments, but just the things you're not supposed to do, like thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, false witness, like all that shit. Like, take all this stuff about worshiping God and all that out of there, and it's just the don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, and then you expect to live a full life out of that. Like, no, that's just the bare minimum. It's like if you just learn, oh, I'm not supposed to touch the stove when you're a kid, and then saying, okay, that's it, like my life is good now I'm gonna be content and happy and feel fulfilled. I don't think that's the case. Like, I just think that the problems we're having, a lot of them are caused by the state, but some of them aren't, and looking for the solution in an incredibly basement-like ideology that just tells you what you're not supposed to do and gives you the basics for not being violent against each other is a mistake. And I think that just fits in with what we're talking about right here.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think that there's an analog to what you're describing about the non-aggression principle being very narrow, and that's in the commands that Jesus gives, where it's fear and love God above all things, and then love your neighbor as yourself. I think that command is very similar to the non-aggression principle, and I think it's an extension, and I think a rational conclusion that I come from those axioms. And so in a certain sense, like, I agree with Jacob that there is a sentiment that comes out of the post-libertarian crowd that, sin very much is a problem, and that I think that the things they're describing are problems. But I also think that it's commanded that something along the lines of the non-aggression principle must be upheld. So it's trying to reconcile those two things. And it's like, I might believe that certain libertine things are sinful, but what can I do about it? What authority do I have? And what is the proper channels to meet that person where they are and try to get them to a better place? And I think that Jesus explains this. It's a hard issue, and we're supposed to love our neighbors. So does loving our neighbor include locking them up because of a certain sexual activity? I don't think that's true, because I reflect on myself, and I don't think that I'm perfect when it comes to that stuff. I'm not how God wants me to be. So it's understanding where I come from, and then trying to see that where, it's trying to take the speck out of my own eye, and thinking that, like, I can from some place of authority say that I have the right to punish you for something that I think is gross, when I also do things that God doesn't think is great. Then who am I? And I think that that's kind of where my libertarianism comes from is from these commands from God. And since I think that these things follow from Jesus's commands, I also want you to take those things to your heart too, even if it's not the full command of God. Like if you are still a libertine, you've at least granted some of it, and I think that's great.
Hey man, like I'm pretty hardcore in my like lack of belief and such, but like I'm obsessed with what is the truth. So if you guys have the truth, like if what y'all believe is the truth, I want to know it. Like, and I grew up with it, and I hit a point to it. I was never really, like I said earlier, I don't suppose, I'm very agnostic. I don't suppose to have any kind of knowledge on the universe that y'all can't observe. But I kind of came to my lack of belief or rejection of belief from like my perception of a moral standpoint. Almost like y'all. So like we talk about sin, we talk about pleasure seeking as these are, I get like if you're seeking pleasure to a point to where it's harming yourself or the ones you love or that kind of route, how it can be bad. But like, I don't know, having fun for the sake of fun. It seems like there is a strand in Christianity that just hates people having fun. And I'm here on this planet, on this rock, to have as much fun as I can and, make sure that my family's okay and loves me and I love them and all that kind of stuff. But I want us all to have fun. I want you guys to have fun. And there seems to be like something in Abrahamic religion that wants us to all kind of hate the world and get ready for the afterlife. And not to try to like come at y'all for your beliefs or anything, but it's kind of like my problem with the whole post-libertarians is they kind of just, if you're libertine or whatever, they just kind of suppose that I'm a leftist or whatever. You're not going to find anybody that is going to stand up more for property rights or gun rights than me. I am full tilt boogie. We should be asking for more on all that. But when it comes to this kind of right-leaning authoritarian type strand, it just pisses me off. Like I really kind of, it just brings me right back to where I was, 15 years ago, thinking John McCain was something like, I don't know.
Well, to take a little bit of a step back, I mean, I want to make sure that there's something clear in this conversation, which is like when I'm engaged in my libertarian circles and activism, specifically in the Mises Caucus, I think it's important that although like these conversations I think can be good and productive and like from a philosophical level, like they're really interesting and I love to have them. But when we're doing libertarian activism, I don't go around like telling people they have to be Christian. You know what I mean? Because like it's kind of a categorical error. And kind of going back to what Reed said a bit ago, which is like it's a very thin philosophy. And it's strictly just about like what you're not supposed to do as far as like you're not supposed to violate other people's rights. And we have to get that down. And, I want to focus on my libertarian activism to just be libertarian activism. And it doesn't, like, if we all agree, it doesn't matter if we're taking slightly different routes to get there. If we all agree that the war on drugs is a problem, if we all agree that the military industrial complex is a problem, if we all agree that the Federal Reserve is a great source of like all these problems, you know what I mean? And our monetary policy is just royally fucked. Then I don't need us to like have perfect agreement on religion or our exact grounding of morality for us to be like, okay, well, let's go work together and solve these problems. But just like Reed said, libertarianism isn't a solution to having a good life. It's like my entire life and opinion on the world is not encompassed just in libertarianism, because I'm a Christian too. So it's like I'm able to look at things through multiple lenses, and I'll look at things through the libertarian lens. And when I'm acting in my libertarian circles, I try not to, make it about religion first and foremost. But if I'm looking at things outside of that, to be like, okay, well, we could have a society that was more libertarian, but also more immoral, in which people are less happy. Like, that's definitely a possibility. And then also to try to examine the relationship between culture and politics. And like, the saying goes, politics is downstream of culture. I think we probably have all heard that. And so as a Christian, I do have opinions on the ways in which sin and the way culture do, I think, lead into these things. So it's like there's two things there. It's like, one, like I do want to be good allies with my non-religious libertarian friends, such as you Will, and you Reed. It's like we're talking about this stuff a lot right now because like that's the topic of the podcast. But like in general, like I'm a state organizer for the Mises Caucus in Pennsylvania. We have our onboarding calls, or we have our, national organizer meetings or stuff like that. Like I'm not sitting there like preaching the Sermon of the Mount at people or anything like that. It's like when we're doing libertarian stuff, it should be libertarian stuff, and it should be that thin philosophy that we're preaching 100%. I just want to make sure like that's clear, because that is a lot of where the division between us and the post-libertarians are.
You guys are completely like I'm clear with you, and I know like your embracement or you embracing anarchy or liberty. I've been watching you guys' show. I see how y'all think, and I think we're in complete agreement on all that kind of stuff. And I don't wear my atheism on my sleeves. Like this is kind of like our conversation. So I'm bringing it back to that. I honestly, I do not care where everybody's religious beliefs are. I do, as far as like, I find it interesting and I like to talk about it, but I would rather us all kind of like disagree. I don't want us all to agree because it's boring. Like,
yeah, I wanted to say that I talk way more about politics than religion, but I do talk about religion on here a bit because I think it's really interesting in uncovering how people think. And I wanted your opinion on this from everybody. When I was still on Twitter, like maybe 1 out of 20 posts would be about religion, and the religious ones would just explode. Like people would be coming at me so angry, teeth and fangs out, ready to fight. And there were very few times where I would ever comment on somebody else's post. Like if they were posting something about Jesus or whatever, like I wouldn't touch it. And there are so many people who have like Bible verses and Christianity stuff on their profiles. That's totally fine. Like on my profile, there was nothing in it about, I think there was for like 2 weeks and I took it out because it was just stupid, but there was nothing in there about my religious beliefs. Mine said like January 6th was a disappointment. It was just like a joke. But I find there's so much hatred if somebody wants to claim that they don't believe in God, if they're a libertarian and they want to be open about it. And I don't really see that toward Christians, at least from no one prominent. Like I see it from the loser brigade, like Archie Flowers, people like that. But for the most part, like if you're like a very stalwart, outgoing Christian, I don't really see anyone make a stink about it. And a lot of our really prominent leaders are Christians, like Tom Woods, Ron Paul. I never saw anyone give a shit about what their religious views were. And some of them talk about it a lot, like Bob Murphy. Like he's very, very Christian. I've never seen anyone really attack him. It seemed to me that there's a lot more vitriol toward atheist libertarians if they want to be open about it and if they want to have a discussion about it. And I know all you guys can attest to this. I would never suggest that you can't be a libertarian if you believe in Jesus. Never. Like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And I would argue with other atheists about this, telling them that they need to shut up because they're being retarded. But it didn't matter. Like, that would, I just always noticed that was an extremely hot topic if I ever brought it up. And I didn't think that the reverse was true. But really, Liam and Jacob, I was wondering what you guys thought of that, because you come from a different angle.
Yeah, I think, Reed, you and I talked about this a little bit on the phone, and I think you're right about that. And I think this actually stems from maybe some pride that comes out of a lot of Christians that are libertarians, and kind of like the role that they think that they serve. I'm not sure if I'm phrasing that right, but it seems that it's almost to be expected that there are going to be atheists in this world. I had Pete on my show, and again, it was kind of like me trying to juggle what Jacob's pointing out, that there seems to be some truth in what they're saying, but it's hard to kind of delineate it. But the phrase that I came at the end of the podcast with was like, it's not so much that libertarianism has an atheist problem from my perspective. It's that libertarianism is of the world, to the extent that we've created it, and the world's a fallen world. Like, I mean, it's to be expected, and I'm not commanded to judge people if they're not. I'm supposed to judge justly and try to love people. So it just seems ridiculous to kind of have high expectations that people wouldn't be. I don't know if that makes sense. It's just the problem is beyond this world. And I think that people have high expectations, and there's kind of like this utopianism in it that it's possible that it wouldn't be. I don't know. Maybe Jacob, you disagree with me there, but
If I could just, I just want to, and by the way, Will, could you mute your mic while you're not talking? I think there's a little bit of feedback coming from you.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, what I think is, I mean, I'm just reflecting on what you said there. I feel like atheists have more of a right to be offended because, like, it's, if you're wrong, you're going to burn for eternity. But I can understand Christians caring more. It's kind of a weird thing. Like, if I would expect a Christian to be really adamant because he's like, oh, come on, dude. Like, I'm so worried about you and I don't want you to end up here. But it's weird when they get so angry and defensive, because it's like, look, dude, you're telling me that I'm going to burn forever if I don't believe the same thing as you. So I feel like I have more of a right to be offended than you do if I just say like, I think you're nuts, or I think what you think is wrong. But it's just an interesting thing that I've noticed. It's usually the other way. It seems like sometimes atheists care more for some reason, and then the Christians are the ones getting offended, and it just seems like it should be the opposite. I just wanted to point that out. I always thought that was kind of...
Yeah, I understand that. And I think that part of the problem is that a lot of Christians think that they are right, and that they kind of create like these human constructs for what is good. And if they meet these standards for themselves, they believe that they're in the right position with God. But a lot of it is like reflection on yourself, and again, pulling the speck out of your own eye before you judge others. So it just seems really ridiculous. And I think it kind of goes to this, I don't know if evangelical is the right word, but like an evangelical non-Christian strain throughout the American right that is like, well, God says that this is a sin, therefore I judge this person, they belong in jail and all of this stuff, without realizing that, I mean, I'm a sinner too, and that is the reason that Jesus came to this earth. And I know I'm getting very theological, but I think it's very important, and that part of the reason Jesus is necessary is because kind of the freedom that comes with his forgiveness. And it's like, I'm never going to be to the standard that I'm supposed to be under the law. So the fact that Jesus saved us is, I mean, there's a lot of freedom in that, and that if I know that I'm failing, I know that I can still be saved. So to judge others, it just seems ridiculous.
So I'm trying to remember what the original question was now. Oh yeah, why people are getting freaked out. That's right.
It was like,
no, I don't. Yeah,
it was the lopsided reaction.
right.
Christians.
So I think that, and like a lot of them will say that there's an atheist problem in the liberty movement. It's like, well, I don't think there's an atheist problem. I think there's a like a wokist, and if anything, it'd be more like, I would say there's a libertine problem, and it's just not all atheists are libertine. But I think it's just Christians sometimes, like so Christians are, just to be frank, like have been losing the culture war for a while now. So a lot of them are, I think, extra like upset and more easily triggered because of that. Like when you're losing, you're just gonna be more easy to agitate. And they've unfortunately, like, it's sort of like they're unfairly I mean, like, sort of like in a general sense, I can understand why they make this judgment, but it is unfair that like they're equating atheism and leftism. And it's like, if you're an atheist, you are libertine. If you are an atheist, you are part of, like it's represented by this woke regime, the cathedral, the COVID people. It's like they view that all as like part of the same thing, and that's not fair. You know what I mean? Especially if you're a libertarian Christian, you should be a little bit better than that and try to not generalize. I mean, like, it's okay to make, like, even this podcast, I've made general statements and like saying like, but I always preface it with like, I'm painting with a broad brush. I'm looking at general trends here, but we have to acknowledge that there's going to be a lot of individual variants and exceptions. So, I think that Christians just need to learn to be better, in the liberty movement, need to learn to be better teammates. To be fair, I think the liberty movement, specifically the LP, has been very hostile to Christians for a long time. So I think that might be part of it too, is just that people are bringing the dumb culture wars into the LP and the movement, and it's not helpful. It's a little bit understandable how it happens, but it's not helpful. We have to try to let that stuff go, and it takes a little bit of stuff like this, where we have people from, I guess, both camps who are trying to model just ways to be good teammates, and we can have discussions about philosophy and religion and where our disagreements are, but then like still be friends and still work together. It's like when you show up to a job, you don't expect everyone at your job to have the same exact beliefs and worldview you have. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, that's just kind of silly. I mean, I work in a family business, so like more than half of my coworkers are people I'm related to, and we don't even all have the same beliefs. So it's even different when you go into a diverse, big environment like the Mises Caucus or the Libertarian Party. It should just kind of be expected, like, that you're going to encounter people that are different than you. But I think a lot of people sometimes have an allergy to people with opposing views. Some people have a mindset, they're very snowflakey. They feel like somebody who disagrees with them is attacking them. That's very prevalent. And I think it's especially because, like I said earlier, like Christians have been losing the culture war for a while. So they've kind of become very defensive.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the Libertarian Party is kind of recently becoming an alternative. Like, I feel like more people are looking at it now than they ever used to. And if you look at, a lot of libertarian thinkers, a lot of them are atheists, like Rothbard, Mises, Hoppe, and then a lot of people who ran for president. Like, I think Gary Johnson was, I can't remember. And then I remember they asked Jo Jorgensen, and she like didn't say anything about it. So even if it's not atheist, it's been very non-religious. And then we've been trying to get like the Ron Paul Republicans to join, and that's just going to have a lot of religious people. So I think you're right, Jacob, that there is some backlash to that. And I never really looked at it in a religious light. I more looked at it in these are a bunch of bigoted alt-righters you're bringing in, but I think you're right that there is a religious tone there too, because a lot of the people who have been in the party have been like progressive left-leaning libertarians, because the more of the right-leaning ones have tried to work inside the Republican Party. And I agree that that also is the problem. And I wouldn't use the word libertine necessarily, because I think you can be like a decent degenerate. Like I think you can be somebody who, is a drug abuser and, just has like a really rambunctious lifestyle, but you're not a woke piece of shit. Like I think being a woke piece of shit is the delineator there. Like that is the problem the Libertarian Party has.
Let me step in there 1 second, though.
Sure.
And I'm with you. I appreciate that there are some good degenerates. But so like the woke stuff, we talk about it all the time, and I've made a few like observations about how, like, I would say certain like the post-libertarians have their own version of wokeism, as the social justice warriors do.
Agreed.
And what annoys me about both sides is it's kind of like the similarities with them. That it's virtue signaling. Not that virtue isn't good, but it's just kind of like when I see, if I wasn't so far removed from Christianity, I'd quote the Bible verse where Jesus is talking about praying in the closet or whatever. But like the virtue signaling turns me off, and that's what I think the woke stuff is, where people are so hostile towards it. It's not that it's bad to be woke and caring of people of different like sexual orientations or races or cultures and all that kind of stuff. It's that our culture, our society has become obsessed with it to the point where we're all kind of tired of it. And it's real easy to just be like sick of it and reject it. And I think that kind of like sentiment, and the sentiment that like what like the more post-libertarians bring to the New Liberty movement or whatever, the Mises Caucus movement, I think that scares a lot of the progressive types that are in the libertarian movement, which I was a Gary Johnson fan since the Ron Paul days. Like I kind of have them sensibilities of like, I'm obnoxiously liberal, but I challenge anybody on my libertarianism. Like I'm it's just we're all unique in our own way.
I think the difference between you and the people we're talking about is the libertarianism comes first with you, where, also like Liam and Jacob are, and me actually, like I'm actually a pretty conservative person, but that comes second. Like most people on Twitter did not think I was a conservative person because of the type of shit I'd post and how much I hate the GOP. But like I barely drink. I don't do
You're
any
so
drugs.
anti-Semitic.
Yeah, well, we'll leave that part out for now. But like I'm a very straight edge traditional guy, but that doesn't matter to me. Like I shouldn't say it doesn't matter to me. In the vein of libertarianism, it doesn't matter to me. It's irrelevant. And with you, it is too. Like you're a libertarian first. A lot of these types, like you said, they're just like the super ultra conservative or post libertarians. They put this stuff at the forefront, and that matters more to them than like the really bad shit that's happening, that the four of us have all agreed, hey, this has to go. And then we can talk about this other stuff, as being the most important thing. So I think that's the difference.
Well, and it's like I'm a libertarian first when I'm in like libertarian spaces. You know what I mean? But like when I'm at home with my family, I'm a father first, I'm a husband first, and I'm a Christian before I'm a libertarian when I'm at home with my kids, or if I'm at church, or if I'm like out in the community not doing political activism. But it just seems to me very autistic to be like, I'm going to lead with praying and quoting scripture during a state convention, or while I'm, door knocking to get ballot access. You know what I mean? It's just, again, just like when I'm at my job, it's like, it's not that I ever stop. My faith doesn't go away. Like, it's not like I'm compartmentalizing these things. It's more like I'm just like, it's like when you go to a job. It's like when I go to a job, I don't like stop being a Christian or stop being married to my spouse, but it's just like while I'm doing a job, I'm going to do the job. And so I think we just like we have to start looking at libertarian, like the Mises Caucus and the LP, like these aren't hobbies. You know what I mean? Like they are kind of a job. Like I honestly, like, it's funny, like my podcast is about biblical anarchy, but like my ideal society, I wouldn't even need to do a podcast, and the Mises Caucus wouldn't have to exist. It's like we are kind of doing a lot of work to eventually, hopefully, never have to do this work. You know what I mean? Like in the ideal sense, obviously, I don't think that's realistic anytime soon, but it's like I view libertarian activism as a job of sorts, because it's not like it's not something that I would do in an ideal sense, where like if we didn't have all this tyranny and didn't have all this evil around us that's perpetuated by the state, well, there'd be no reason to do that. But there is a reason to do it, and so this is a job. And I'm not saying, like, obviously I have Christian motivations for why I care about these things, but just like I have Christian motivations for taking care of my family and for excelling at my job. You know what I mean? But it's just about, like, I don't know, like it's not like I'm trying to compartmentalize these things. It's just like it's more like I'm trying to properly orient myself in the world, and just like not like there is a natural order and a natural hierarchy of like the way things stack up. And I think for some people, they just feel this need to very autistically like mash them all together. It's like the kids with Play-Doh, where it's like you have the blue Play-Doh, the red Play-Doh, the yellow Play-Doh, and there's always that kid that's just like, I'm gonna screw our Play-Doh sets up and mix all the colors, and now it's just like this gray mush. And that's how some people live their lives. It's like they can't stop, like they're like always having to mix everything and not reading like context of like social cues and time and place. I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think the point about compartmentalizing is really important, and the point that you made earlier about making a categorical error is spot on, and I think this perfectly encapsulates it. I always go back to one of my first interviews with Gerard Casey. He's the libertarian philosopher, and the idea is just like, I can be a religious Christian, I can be a cultural conservative, and I can be a political libertarian. I think those are all very consistent. But when we're in the arena of libertarianism and politics, it's also very consistent to treat them as that arena. And I think Christianity would say that the separation of church, or you could follow from Christianity that the separation of church is important here, and just advocate for libertarian principles consistently with Christianity, but not lead with it, because you do have to meet people where they are.
Well, and I'm going to quote some scripture here that's usually quoted against me, but Romans 13 talks about submitting to the governing authorities. Now, I've gone into a deep dive on my show several times about why governing authorities, or the word that's being used there is hyperacusia, does not mean the state. And I'm not going to go into that right now, because like that's about a 10-minute argument I'd have to make. I don't want to do it, but just go watch the episode,
and you can see it over there.
Yeah. So taking Romans 13 to mean that it's not the state, but we're called as Christians to submit to governing authorities. Those governing authorities are not defined as being Christian. They're defined as being a terror to evil and for the administration of civil justice, which just means like the non-aggression principle, which means like, don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, don't violate people's rights. So, even like in an Ancapistan, perfect voluntarist society, there's going to be some form of governance. And, we have to remember as Christians that like, those institutions, like, because I hate using the phrase separation of church and state, because like, it's silly to me when I don't believe in a state to say that. It's like I don't believe in the separation of church and state when I don't believe in the state. But you know what I mean? Like, but I do believe in the separation of church and governing authority. Those are two different things. Especially like, you know, I'm a big fan of the Dutch reformers, and Abraham Kuyper had this idea that was later expounded upon called sphere sovereignty, which is something I talk about on my podcast a lot too. But just the idea that there are different you know, natural hierarchies within society, basically, and that they don't mix. And like the church is a hierarchy of authority, but it's one that Christians submit to voluntarily. And you know, an atheist doesn't submit to church authority because he, you know, I mean, he chooses not to. Governing authorities are a bit different. Even in an Ancapistan society, like if you murder someone or you steal from them, like, you know, I mean, people might get away with it because we live in an imperfect world, but the way that you ideally set it up is that people don't get away with breaking the law or with violating people's rights. And so, you know, the way that it's just we have to remember that there are different spheres of life, and they kind of all have different rules, and they, the way that we operate in each of them is going to be different. Kind of like I was saying earlier, like, you know, if I behaved at the workplace like I do when I'm in bed alone with my wife, that would obviously be very problematic. So just to draw an obvious example.
Yeah. Hey, Jacob, I wanted to talk about something that you brought up in the chat. I think it was when I was still on Twitter. So it was funny. We migrated over to Facebook because we all can connect on Facebook once I got banned from Twitter, and we've been talking over there.
Meta.
Yeah, Meta. But something you said is that you are, and I think you said it in this conversation too, is that you're an agnostic Christian. And I remember the thing you said in the chat is to the Christians who would get upset about that, you would ask them, what do you think faith is? You know, and I think that's an interesting point, because I don't tell people I'm an agnostic, because to me, that's obvious. Like, we're all agnostic. That's why Gnostics piss me off so much, because they act like they know something that they don't. They might have strong inclinations. They might even have had experiences that lead them to believe there's a 100% chance that what they believe is true, but they don't actually know. So the other thing is, like, you know, Christianity is not a claim of knowledge. It's a belief, right? So is atheism. Atheism is not a claim of knowledge that there is no God. I just believe that there is no God. So that's why I call myself an atheist. And yes, I'm an agnostic because I don't actually know that. But when I tell people I'm an atheist, they're demanding that I prove that what I'm saying is true. And I'm like, that's no. I'm not telling you that I know this to be true. It's what I believe. But I just want your reaction to that, because I thought that was a very interesting point you brought up.
Well, it's kind of about like getting into epistemology and like how, like, what is knowledge and what is truth and what are truth claims. And so it's a little bit of a semantics thing, but it's kind of important. And it also kind of goes into what we've been talking about, which is kind of like our mindsets. And yeah, it's actually, that's a good episode to check out, is my conversation with Jose a while back, because this is really like, that conversation is where this all kind of stemmed from, is like we really started to expound this ideas, because like Jose started, like, what's weird is like, it's like I'm a Christian anarchist, but I've had a lot of atheists on my show to talk about philosophy and libertarianism, but it's like, if you want to say that like you're a Gnostic Christian, to me, it's just a contradiction of terms, because it's a misunderstanding of what faith is. And if you're conflating faith and knowledge, and I think it's like, why are Christians so afraid to just admit that they have faith? Like, that's what the Bible says to do. It doesn't say to claim you know God is true and that Jesus is your savior with all certainty and to eradicate all doubt. Actually, there's plenty of scriptures out there that talk about like the normalcy of having doubts, and that, you know, there's the whole like metaphor about like you can have the faith that's the size of a mustard seed. And faith is, you know, it's not. Now, I want to also make a distinction. Like, I'm not saying faith is literally just like, believing something on zero evidence and it's completely irrational, because sometimes atheists will make that claim, and it's like, well, I don't think that's true either. Although there's kind of like a spectrum, right? There are some statements of faith that are more justifiable than others. So, like, if I say, like, I don't know, like, I have no way of knowing that the sun is going to come up in the morning, but if I say I believe it will, that's like, probably like at the highest level of the spectrum of faith in terms of justifiable faiths. Now, if I say I believe and I have faith that I'm going to like close my eyes, and when I open them up, Ron Paul will appear in my basement and I'm going to smoke a bowl with him. Like, I think that's pretty clear that like the odds of that are very astronomically low, and there's no like philosophical or logical grounding for that.
Yeah, I make the inverse argument with skepticism and agnosticism and atheism. Like, if you tell me you believe there is a higher power, I'm gonna be like, okay, your guess is as bad as mine. I have no idea. Right. But then if you're going to be like super specific about like all these things, that's when it's going to be like, okay, you lost me. Like, I'm not, but
right. I remember that you said like Mormonism was like more irrational than just like regular Christianity, because there's more specific claims that were made in Mormonism and stuff.
Right.
So yeah, it's like, to me, it's like the Christian faith, to borrow a phrase from C.S. Lewis, is a reasonable faith, meaning that like it's not like I believe there's a flying spaghetti monster or unicorns orbiting around Jupiter. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like completely fabricated from nothing. There are solid philosophical and even sort of like observational arguments we can make as Christians for why our faith is, more on the side of being somewhat justified than unjustified on that spectrum. But it's still faith. It's still something that we can't prove concretely. And to me, it's just rather intellectually dishonest and kind of unbiblical to pretend that there's no difference between faith and knowledge. I mean, that's like, we have two different words here. They don't mean the same thing. So if they don't mean the same thing, then we need to clearly distinguish the two of them.
Would you call faith and belief the same thing?
I mean, they're kind of similar, but I don't know. I don't know if I could give you the exact difference between the two. I mean, it's like, I guess like I don't know, like they might be the same thing. I'd have to think on that a bit more. Okay, because I think there's probably like two of those words that are kind of synonyms, but like also probably have slightly different etymologies and uses. But I mean, what I'm getting at is just like, it's kind of like scales of probability and truth claims, right? And like, there are some things that like to be clear, like faith is not science. Like, through the scientific method, we can create an hypothesis and we can test the hypothesis and be like, okay, the test is either confirmed the hypothesis or it didn't confirm it. And science is a lot more concrete. And, even in science, you very rarely get to a point of like 100% certainty, because science is kind of like, continually changing and you're learning more and more. But like, there are certain things that are like constant and like that can be knowledge claims. Like, we kind of know that the gravitational force on Earth is 9.8 meters per second squared. Like, that's pretty constant. We know the speed of light and what that is, and we've repeated these things over and over again through science in a way that puts them on a level of knowledge that to me is like, well, these are things that we could more colloquially say like we know to be true. We're using all this technology right now to communicate with each other. I know that like if I pick up my bottle of ginger ale here and I take off the lid and I pour it all over my computer, that most likely my conversation with you guys will be over because my computer will short circuit and fry. Like, those are claims I can make where like, and it's sort of like, some people get really autistic here with solipsism and be like, well, you can't 100% know anything. It's like, okay, sure. Like, it's maybe technically impossible to be 100% certain about something, but like 99% is good enough, in my opinion, to say that I'm certain of something, right? I'm not as certain about my beliefs in God and my faith as I am these other things. But at the same time, my faith matters a lot more to me because it's kind of what gives me meaning in life. It's what orients me in the world. So I do these things because they make sense to me, but that's very personal and subjective. And things that are very personal and subjective and things that are not testable by the scientific method, you just can't categorize them the same way.
Do you think that a part of that is because faith is received? And I know that that's probably more of a theological question, and there might be some debates between denominations, but do you think that faith is received in I guess?
Well, I'm a Calvinist, so yes.
Okay. And do you think that what you're saying is necessarily because it's received? I guess, how do you fit?
Well, to get more into the theological, like, nitty gritty of it, like, you know, from a more reformed perspective, that, like, yeah, I believe that the Holy Spirit has to regenerate you, and that faith is something that we cannot even will ourselves. Like, I don't think that before the Holy Spirit acts on you, that people are capable of truly accepting salvation and coming to Christ. So I think there has to be some kind of revelation. And I think I actually talked to Reed about this in a private chat a while back, where I was like, I don't even get into a lot of arguments about trying to, like, I don't appreciate, and I actually kind of get a little triggered myself when Christians try arguing atheists into believing God. It's like, that's just, for my theological framework, that's not very sound. Like, if you were able to argue people into faith, that would be very convenient, but like, that's not what the Bible tells us to do. That says that we're supposed to go out there and preach the gospel, but it's the Holy Spirit acting upon people's hearts that brings them to God. Now, the Holy Spirit works through our preaching of the gospel, so that's an important part of it. But our part isn't, like, we're not the one that's supposed to convict people of sins. We're not the ones that are supposed to transform their heart from a heart of stone to a heart of flesh. That's the job of the Holy Spirit. And it's through that someone believes in God, and then they, you know, but you still have to, I think, categorize it as a faith, because it's a very experiential, subjective thing that happened to you. You can't go out and, like, demonstrate it in the same way that you can demonstrate things through the scientific method.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think Reed and I actually talked about a similar thing on the phone, where we were kind of saying, like, I couldn't just tell Reed something logically that would get him to believe in Christianity the next day, and he couldn't do the same thing with my faith. It's really not shakeable in
Right.
in a way.
And anyone that doesn't think faith is received as a Christian, just read the story of Paul. It's a pretty clear-cut example.
Well, I've never read the Bible. I've just watched a couple of Christopher Hitchens videos, and I got my gist of it from that. So I don't know who this Paul guy is you're talking about, but by the way, that's a joke for anyone watching. That was I've been accused of that many times, though. Yeah, but I think it's disingenuous, for atheists and Christians to say that the other's belief is unfounded, or that they don't really believe it. You hear from Christians, there's no such thing as an atheist. And then, atheists will say all Christians are delusional. Like, I do think that a lot of Christians are not sincere believers. I think a lot of them, it's like a cultural appropriation in the United States.
I would agree with you.
And I think probably a lot of atheists actually don't believe there isn't a God. Like, I think a lot of them, I've talked about this similarity with libertarianism. Like, they didn't arrive there from an honest perspective. They arrived there because they wanted to live a certain lifestyle, and they didn't want repercussions for it. So I think you have disingenuous people in both camps, but to just make a blanket statement about everyone in the opposite camp and say that they actually think this way, they're lying to you and they're lying to themselves. That really pisses me off, because I legitimately believed different things a decade ago than I do now. And it was an honest transformation. And so I know what it's like thinking that people are going to go to hell. Like I remember being in that camp. You know, I remember being scared of ending up there myself. So it really pisses me off when I hear atheists who have never believed in something, and then also when I hear like Christians who've never even questioned what they believe or internalized it in any way. It just really pisses me off to hear them make blanket statements about the other side.
Yeah, and it's like, and I'd be curious to hear, like, you know, because I know Reed and I kind of know your answers, Reed, because I've talked to you a lot more, but I'm curious to hear Will's answers. And I think he's kind of alluded to it already, but to me, it's like, I actually think that atheists, people that don't believe in God, like, I think there's like, because there's Christians or religious people who say, like, we believe in God. Then there's atheists that go, like, I don't believe. Then I think there are people who are truly like agnostics who are just like, I don't know what I believe, and I'm not picking a side. Like they truly don't know. But I think that like anything besides that pure middle ground agnosticism of like not being really biased towards belief in or not in God, and I know this triggers a lot of more traditional atheists like your Sam Harris's and your Matt Dillahunty's and all that. And I've watched hours of their content. I try not to be like other Christians who don't know my like philosophical opponents' arguments and stuff. I try to be able to steelman their positions.
Jacob,
But
you've only watched a couple William Lane Craig videos, and that's it. You've never watched. I'm just trying to do the opposite of what everyone says.
right.
A Carl
But-
Sagan video.
But no, I don't think that God, I lost my train of thought there. Was that joke? Oh no, but I do think that atheism is sort of a statement of faith insofar as that, like, if you're going to say, I don't believe God exists, or like at least I'm unconvinced that God exists, it's like, well, you can be unconvinced of something, but that it's not really like, that's kind of a semantical game. You're either, at the end of the day, you have to either live your life as kind of like by default, you're either going to live your life from a psychological perspective thinking that God is real or not thinking that God is real. But either one of those positions is something that, a person does through a process that's more akin to faith than one that I think is purely like demonstrable or, 100% verifiable, or, we could classify as knowledge. And so I think, that's sort of my perspective. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think.
Just before Will goes, like, I just want to clarify. I think belief is necessitated on positive proof. So with anything in life, the burden is on the claim, right? The burden is on the claim of the existence of something. If the natural state is disbelief, right? That's your natural state, that you don't believe something exists until you are proven that it does. People believed the world was flat because without any further explanation, that makes sense until it was proven wrong. So, like, I kind of draw it this way. Like, if I told you Donald Trump was sitting in, I don't know what room you're in right now, but in your living room, and he was eating a bag of Cheetos with a Great Dane sitting on his lap, are you agnostic about that, or do you not believe me? Like, you're probably going to not believe me. And then if I show you a picture of it, you're still going to be like, no, this is Photoshop or something. And then if I'm like, here he is on the phone, and I give you the phone, and he's like, Jacob, this is a tremendous living room. This chair is amazing. It's really exceptional. You're still going to be like, And then even when you walk out into the room and you see him sitting in the chair with the Great Dane on his lap, you're still going to be like, I don't know, is this the real Donald Trump? So, like, I don't think that that's a position of faith that you'd be taking to not believe that Donald Trump was in there. It's just your natural state, and it takes a lot to actually convince you that something is true, if that makes sense.
That's a very interesting argument. And to go back to, you mentioned him already, William Lane Craig. He came up with, and I have no idea what I think about it. I studied it a little bit when I was taking an epistemology class, but he believes that the actual the beginning point is belief in God, and through like the inherent design of the universe. So it's like if you understood that, like, you know, everything that has a design has a creator, you would naturally start out with that assumption, and that you would have to prove that there wasn't a God because everything is so masterful and mysterious. But I haven't really thought about that, and epistemology is way over my head.
Yeah, because I think it's kind of like a conflation between epistemology and then like psychological perceptions.
Yeah.
Because like in a philosophical sense, I agree with Reed's epistemology that like the natural state from a philosophical expression is non-belief. But I think where I'm approaching it more is like psychologically humans, and especially like praxeologically, like human action. It's like, you know, if you're, I think that a state of being unconvinced that God exists is still somewhat of a positive action insofar as that, like, you know, I think that the base, like, I might disagree with you a little bit there, Reed. Like, I think that the base or like the starting point of any claim isn't pure I reject it or pure I accept it. I think it's just pure agnosticism and skepticism saying, I don't know, it could be true, but I need to be I need to see more to know if it's true, or I would have to see it proved false to know it's false. So I think that might be, we might have slightly different epistemologies there. But
So
I
I think the natural state is agnosticism until a claim is presented to you. Then it relies on proof, and if there's no proof, then the natural state is disbelief. So you don't already have a disbelief in something because there's been nothing presented to you. But then once something is put in front of you and you can't prove it, then I think the natural state becomes disbelief, unless you can actually see it or touch it or feel it or sense it or have some experience that leads you.
But I think, I guess it's like what I'm conceptualizing as disbelief, or the way you're saying there, I think that there's a difference between disbelief and, like, I would still categorize just like that natural disbelief as agnosticism, whereas atheism to me is actually someone going, well, I'm just not unconvinced. I'm leaning towards the belief that nothing could convince me, or that there is no good argument. I guess that's at least how I see it. That you know, I'm
I
not.
think the more specific the claim is, the more disbelief there's going to be. Like if there is a very vague claim, I think there's going to be more agnosticism. It's once you start applying specifics to it that disbelief comes into the picture. So, like, there are, I mean, I've talked about this with you before there, and you kind of mentioned it, like Mormonism is statistically less likely to be true than Christianity just because you have the golden tablets and all that shit that's added on. There are some versions of God that I would actually probably consider myself agnostic on. It's just atheist is a simpler term to use in general because most of the claims of God are pretty specific. But, you know, there are some people out there who believe in some sort of deistic God that basically just wound up the clock and let it go. Like with that type of thing, I'm going to be leaning much more toward agnosticism than atheism, if that makes sense. So I just think it's like the more that you're required to believe in without proof, the more you're going to disbelieve instead of just, you know, having a completely unbiased opinion or unsubstantiated thought on it, if that makes sense.
I kind of agree with you. I just think, I mean, and this might partly be semantics, but I guess I just feel like there's a little bit of muddying between agnosticism and atheism, because it's just like, because to me, like, there has to be a difference between those terms. And to me, the difference would have to be at some point, especially when you look at it from a praxeological or psychological perspective, would have to be some kind of like, well, you're definitely positively acting in ways that are based upon your lack of belief. And definitely some atheists, maybe this isn't you, Reed, but there are definitely some atheists that would go as far as to say, well, no, I'm convinced there is no God. which definitely, to me, at least we could probably agree that at that point, that's closer to a statement of faith than it is a statement of like something that can be, considered knowledge.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think once you're making an absolute statement, then you have some sort of faith, and that faith could be influenced by empirical experiences or facts that but to make any sort, because I don't think there's anything that you can know 100%, not even just in the metaphysical realm, but even in the physical realm. You don't know if your senses are playing tricks on you. You just don't know if you're in the matrix or what's going on. So like, you can't know anything 100%. So anytime you make an objective claim, you are using some sort of faith, I would say. And I think belief and objective claims of knowledge are different.
Do any of y'all actually know an atheist? It's like, I'm not agnostic. I know there's no God. Not just somebody just being an asshole in a conversation, but somebody that's
it's very few and far between. It's very few and far between. I've met people like that. But that's why I get confused, because it's like, to me, it's just like a Christian is sort of a clear stake in the ground, right? Like, no one is generally confused, like, you're a Christian or not a Christian. But then it's just like, and like, it's not like, I'm not trying to call you guys out or like, I don't know, like bitch, but it's just like, it just seems like a lot of times it's like atheists and agnostics play this slippery game where they're like, I'm kind of this and kind of that, and use it as a way to dodge certain questions. And really, like, all I'm trying to get at is just like, when it comes to like metaphysics, there's no way to know one way or the other. We're all stuck in some sort of some level of agnosticism. You know what I mean? And that's basically what I'm trying to get at, is just like, people who believe in God and people who don't believe in God, the one thing we share in common is that we can't really know either way.
I'll completely grant you that. I think, like you said, maybe some people do kind of use the term to get out of a hard question, but I desperately try not to, because I agree with kind of both of y'all on your perspective of like agnosticism to atheism, kind of like there's levels of it. I was kind of
the autism spectrum and libertarianism, it's a sliding scale. Like,
yeah. My autism definitely is in the atheism realm. I'm more of a chill, thin libertarian, but then I do get kind of triggered on the kind of atheist agnostic terms. I don't know why. It's just kind of in my wiring. But I'll grant you a little bit that it could be maybe a slight bit of faith that you're kind of like pushing towards, like, I believe there is no God. Like, I believe there is no God. So I guess that could be a bit of faith towards, like, I sure fucking hope there isn't, if I'm as blasphemous as I please. But
Pascal's wager is still out there, Will.
Yeah, I know. I know. But I'm too autistic to take it. I just go, I don't know.
Yeah, it is kind of the weakest argument, to be honest. But
for sure. It's like the lazy Homer Simpson kind of like. But
I guess I'm technically agnostic as to whether or not the world is round, but I have a lot of reasons to think it is. Like,
I knew this was just a conspiracy theory show.
This has got kicked off of YouTube.
We're done. I mean, I haven't flown to outer space and looked back at the globe and seen that it is so you'll always have some level of agnosticism. That's why I think, like, if you're going to use agnostic as a noun, it has to be what you described a few minutes ago, which means you really have no fucking clue. And you're just like, I don't know, like, your guess is as good as mine, and I'm not going to make any assertions. I think intelligent people and assertive people and people who want to know truth are actually not going to be completely agnostic, because they're going to start basing their beliefs off of their personal experiences and what they've read and what they've seen and what they've heard other people say. I think if you are an agnostic as a noun, you're not trying very hard. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's a good adjective to have. It's not a good noun to be, I guess.
Well, and it's like, to me, like, the other thing that I think is interesting in this is that, like, when it comes to like statements of faith, or like I see in the comments, Jose and others are talking about like presuppositionalism. And to me, it's like, it's unavoidable, because like Christians have presuppositionalism when it comes to God, but then like we can objectively prove our morality on God. And then with atheists, it's like the opposite problem. It's like the presuppositionalism is just the morality, but then it's like, well, once you've asserted that, then you can objectively, rationally prove, like, you know, ways in which, like, you know, it works in the world, or like, you know, how to objectively adhere to it, etc. But like, no matter what, people are stuck making a presupposition. It's like, my presupposition is God exists, and then it logically follows that humans have value, and that, you know, natural law coincides with that, and you know, that's where good and evil come from. You know, the one thing that, like, you know, intellectually I find really hard to wrap my mind around, from the autistic Christian perspective I'm coming from, is like, I don't understand how atheists and non-religious people get to morality, and why. I mean, at the very least, it seems to me you'd have to admit morality is not objective at all. It's just some kind of subjective, psychological, evolutionarily come to construct that has no meaning. And to me, that's where it falls apart for me personally, because it's just like, if all we are is stardust and just like highly evolved, like, you know, almost like algorithms of things that are just designed to produce more of ourselves, you know what I mean? It's like, if that's all we are, then it's hard for me to be like, okay, but why do I care about morality so much? You know what I mean? It's just like, why, like you could make an argument, like this is what I've said on my show. It's like, you can make a decent case without religion for why pedophilia is not evolutionarily beneficial behavior. But it's hard to explain why, like, we are so morally possessed that we, you know, we're so outraged by pedophilia that we literally write songs about throwing them in wood chippers. You know what I mean? Like,
We made
so
a
it's
caucus
like,
about it.
right, we made a caucus about it, right? So it's like, if we like it, so it's like, it's hard for me to like, okay, but how do I get to that from we are just atoms and stardust? So
Can I jump in there? Can I jump in there?
Sure.
Because I'm very much, I do think we are just kind of a byproduct of the universe. Like, we are stardust plus time, and you know, some monkeys throwing some shit around, and here we are. But
We're just dumb monkeys.
just dumb monkeys. You know, like the Mr. Garrison explaining evolution. Like, a monkey fucked a retarded fish frog, and that's your. But there is. I don't necessarily know where we get to like valuing, like right at the point where we value all human life. I know I do. I don't know exactly. I guess it's just we're I think if, like, when you talk about, like, I'm gonna back up here. You were mentioning pedophilia, how we're all like naturally like predisposed to just have a hatred towards that. I think that's definitely become evolved morality, for lack of a better word than that.
Not
Like,
among politicians for some reason. But
well, sure, like they're, and I'm with you. Like, our politicians are soaked in that kind of shit, and we've seen that with the Epstein stuff and all the crap, the evil that is in that. But like, I mean, 50 years ago, I mean, don't go looking too far at Elvis Presley and the Rolling Stones and all of our heroes from 50 years ago.
I know, yeah.
And then really, even like, you could back up 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and everybody was getting molested. Every single fucking person. It was. Am I wrong? Like, it just seemed like.
Sorry, I wasn't laughing at you, what you were saying, by the way. That was bad timing. Someone said that. So.
No, I mean, like, am I wrong in like thinking that like we as a human species, not perfectly, are like recognizing different things that we've done wrong in the past, as in like abuse or like expose children to sexuality before they're ready for it. And like we're starting to see that kind of thing. I don't necessarily think that comes from Christianity, not to say it's like taken away from it. I think it is our evolved morality of us right up here. I think our collectively we're all getting smarter and more empathetic of each other. It's what do y'all think on that? Like that's where I go. I think we're evolving to become more moral. I think
go ahead, Liam.
I tend to like stick away from kind of like the historical like moral arc of history, in that like we are developing towards kind of like a better age. And I think the reason I come to that conclusion is just the evidence around us. It seems more of like, I mean, and this is partially why I think I'm religious, is because it seems to be more of like an Old Testament type story where it's constantly this like, you know, a nation grows or the people grow and they strive towards this like Tower of Babel type situation. And then they find their idols, they distance themselves from God. God gives them the free will to do so. And then, then they fall away. And then they collapse in on themselves. And I think that that's kind of what we're doing right now. I wouldn't say that we're a more moral people now, because that just doesn't seem, I don't see that around me.
Well, what did you think about like my example there? Do you think that we are getting better at least about fucking children?
I don't know.
Yes.
I think that some of us are, but then some of us, as far as like the human race, not us here, but some of us are getting worse. You know what I mean? It's like, to me, it's like, in some ways, it's just like with social media. It's like, you know, it's like I see the good you're pointing at, but then I also, it's like the pie has gotten bigger. So like as the pie gets bigger, you're like, look at how much the good has grown. I'm like, yeah, but the evil has grown at kind of an equal rate, in my opinion. So it's a little bit of,
you're making a communist argument there against growing the pie, Jacob. That's not very good.
No, actually, I want to go deeper. Anarcho-primitivist argument that we just need to stop baking pies because it's dangerous technology.
Yeah, see, I've made the argument that this is a little bit different subject, but you know, embracing a more naturalist, Darwinistic approach to life would actually be more humanistic and merciful, because we've elevated, you know, people who are destroying society to a level they shouldn't be at. We should actually be letting them get trodden down by people. And I mean, that's a long conversation to have, and I've had it on Bridget Fettis's show. But I think, you know, I think humans have evolved so much beyond any other animal that there is this delineation on morality and caring about your fellow man that you don't see as explicitly in other areas of nature. But you do see a progression. Like, I mean, there are animals that care for each other in non-instinctual ways. You know, like elephants will come back to the graves of their relatives for years after they died. That has no inherent instinctual protective nature to it. Like there's something else going on there. You'll see animals mourn. I mean, not just elephants, but other animals do that too when their relatives die. You know, dolphins have pushed in World War II. These guys got shot down in a bomber out in the Pacific, and they had their raft that they inflated, and then these dolphins came and pushed them miles to this island where they got off, and they ended up surviving. So you have like these weird things that don't seem just purely survivalist from other animals. So, you know, some people would say that points to a god, but I'm just saying that I don't think there's this super clear-cut delineation that humans are made in God's image and then everything else doesn't have any of those tendencies. I think it's because we're so much more sophisticated than these other animals are, but I think you see it in pockets in nature and other places.
I definitely agree with you there that there is definitely something, you know, that you can track through evolution of animals to us as far as like an evolved ethic. But there's just something about like, and this is where I think you and I really fundamentally disagree from remembering from our last conversation, but like, while I am a bit more agnostic and a bit more like, being humble that it's faith when it comes to being a Christian, I'm a bit more pushy when it comes to rejecting like a pure naturalist framework of society, because I just feel like there has to be more than naturalism. Because I don't think that consciousness and emotions and morality are just things that you can purely explain through the rationalist framework, at least not explained in a satisfactory fashion, in my view. I just think that there's something. It's like we can explain, like from a scientific sense, like why animals would evolve certain behaviors, but then it's like why do we, like, again, it's like we can say that we've evolved for like pedophilia and incest being bad for like obvious reasons, but then it's like why do we see those things and not just go, oh, come on guys, stop, why are you doing that again? Why are you kidnapping these children and holding them hostage and having these inappropriate sexual relations? Just knock that out, little slap on the wrist, and everything goes on. Like, no, like we treat it like, even people who don't believe in God treat these people like they're part of a satanic cult. I mean, like we're very possessed by these narratives of good and evil. This is something that Jordan Peterson talks a lot about too, which is just like it's something psychological that like we behave in these ways so much that I just think it begs the question to something that, like, because if we're just atoms, it's like, why do atoms care? I just that's where I think there's a hard line, and where I think that's what pushes me at least towards religion.
I don't necessarily think we're just atoms and just stardust or whatever, like the material world. I think there's unexplainable shit. Call it the astral plane, soul, whatever, all that kind of stuff. When we start to talk about it, it all sounds silly unless we structure it into like an organized religious talk, and then people can agree on it. But like, I think there's a lot of wiggle room between like, maybe we have a soul and there's some kind of like strive towards goodness, and then like bring it all the way to the Abrahamic religions of biblical times. You talked about like, why would we not just see like the children and just go like, come on guys, like why we even care? Because I think it's because we actually see the damage that's done, like the obvious damage that's done to kids and stuff. And that's kind of like where like we can see that moral damage, when you're aggressing upon somebody, stealing or violence towards them, we can see that moral damage. But when there's a dude that's just sitting there smoking too much pot or whatever, or, a gay pride parade where there's some dudes with assless chaps marching around, I don't
images in our minds right now. Will.
The only reason I protest the gay pride parade is because it's Reed and Clinton in the front, and I hate them.
I know. Reed.
But I want to point out that Clint is in front of me in that parade, so we know who's given and who gets it. So. Yeah, I mean, something you're talking about there, Will, that I kind of agree with is, I'm an agnostic atheist, and I do want to know if this stuff is real. What's unfortunate, in my opinion, is that we've compartmentalized every way that you're supposed to look at any of this stuff. Like, instead of observing people from the past and seeing what they thought and then being like, okay, that's interesting, like we do with science. Like, I mean, we don't think Galileo was an idiot now, or Isaac Newton or any of those guys, but they don't know nearly what we do now. We still can respect the contributions they made, but we're not going to say like everything Isaac Newton said was true or everything Copernicus said was on point. Like, we've learned since then. So, I mean, that's how I would be with morality and the search for truth and the search for spirituality. Like, I feel like instead of just adding on to what we've known throughout time, We have somewhere in the past where we've said, okay, this is it right here. This is truth. And going forward, you need to sift through your life and just take out anything that defies this. Like, that's just incredibly backwards to me, because I don't know if God doesn't exist. There could be a God out there. I could be wrong. But I think if there is a God, it's probably nothing like any of us, or it's probably not nearly as exact as any religion or any person has conjured in their brain. Like, it's probably gonna, I mean, this is even a lot of religious texts talk about how God is he's beyond our minimal understanding. We try to put him in a box and create God in our image instead of him creating us in his image. It's kind of like the reverse happens. So I think if there is a God, if there is something out there, I don't know, like, maybe people have found parts of it, like probably parts of Christianity have touched on whatever that is, parts of Islam, and then maybe like a Bob Marley song, or some guy running for president. Like, I feel like you hear little bits of truth.
John McCain.
Maybe not him. Like, I doubt he touched on it at all. But if there is something out there, it would seem to me that a lot of different people, different religions, different cultures have probably caught glimpses of it and tried to explain it in the best way they possibly can. But if you try to approach the conversation that way, it just doesn't go anywhere, because people are they're just hard-lined. Like, you got to believe this, or this, and this can't be compatible with this. It's like, whoa. Like, we haven't been that way with anything else throughout history, with economics, with music, with science. Like, we've built off of what we know throughout the years. We never, like, imagine if in 1580 we said, this is music, and this is the entirety of it. You don't need anything but this, or with science, or with advances in technology, whatever. Like, it just seems like an incredibly backwards way to approach the conversation. So, I mean,
I don't like 1580, but if we could have stopped technology at the guillotine, we'd be a lot better off.
You might not be wrong. I mean, it's hard to guillotine 500 million people, and we did that in the 20th century with all the technology we had. So you make a valid point there. Do you guys want to cap it there? I'd like to do this again. Like, I think we should probably do this like once a month. This is a good, and we don't always
I'm
talk
down
about this either. We can talk about anything, but
I'm down, man. That sounds cool.
I thought this was really great. So
yeah,
I enjoy getting to. Go ahead.
I think we should definitely do it earlier in the day, so I don't become a vegetable halfway through, and I won't drink two dry scoops of pre-workout beforehand.
He's in mountain time with me too. You guys on the East Coast, like, you're
crazy.
He's a vampire. I know he's a Christian, but he's also a vampire. He's still so.
Dude, I'm so caffeinated. I drank so much coffee when I knew we were doing this. I normally get up at like 4 a.m. So as soon as we hit this, I'm hitting the sack.
Well, I love all you guys. I've had y'all on the show before, and I like what you guys have to say. And I think all 4 of us are sincere, and we're actually trying to figure this out. We're not just coming with some bullshit narrative that we're trying to push on other people. But let's do plugs. So, Will, what's the name of your show? No.
Yeah, no show, but as always, best blueberry wine in the world. Buy it if you're interested. And again, guys, I'm really happy that we had this conversation. Loved it. I think next time I'd really like to focus on like what we're all doing in the Mises Caucus and our kind of like direction. I like what we're going to really do here in the material world. Try to focus on that. But thanks for including me, guys. Like, you guys are all like content creators and everything, and I've just made Reed laugh on Twitter a few times.
Well, hey,
well, you're the real MVP.
Wine is content, so you're a content creator too. So.
Yeah, hey, my homeboy JC is a big fan of that wine.
Oh yeah, yeah. See, I'm literally turning blueberries into wine. Not
Yeah.
quite water, but yeah, yeah. I don't hydrate this shit, JC.
Liam?
It's the Liam McCollum show, and I hope to have all of you guys back on the show soon. I'm actually talking to Popular Liberty on Monday, I believe, because I think that it's very important, and a lot of the stuff he says I kind of agree with and sympathize with. I just want to flesh it out and see the actual point at which we do disagree. And then I'm also releasing an episode with Joshua McWhorter in a few days about yelling fire in movie theaters and free speech and the constitutional issue there. But yeah, I really enjoy this, and I would love to do it again.
Jacob?
Yeah, so podcast is Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy. Twitter is at Biblical Anarchy. And yeah, I do a little bit of it's good mix of Christian stuff, but also libertarian stuff. Like, this week I had Spike coming on just last night. So that was a great conversation. I've had like Pete Quinones on, had a lot of people. I got Dave Smith coming on next month. So
Nice.
yeah, so I'm excited about that. So
He's the booster shot of
Yeah.
podcast. If you can get him on your show, that launches you. So
Hey, I want to say this too on Dave Smith. Y'all quit making him Christian. Y'all are gonna ruin my favorite comedy show. Legion of Skanks is way more important than this libertarian nonsense. And I don't like it.
Damn it! My whole podcast with him was going to be walking him through the sinner's prayer. You got me.
No, quit.
Oh gosh, but no, that's it. And yeah, I enjoyed this conversation, and I definitely want to see more. Like especially within like the Mises Caucus specifically, but also just the liberty movement broadly. Just let's not bring the dumb culture wars that we've been fighting because of the state into our liberty spheres. Let's like we can have these disagreements in a really I think really interesting, edifying way where we all learn from each other and the audience gets something out of it. But then we remember hey, the most important thing is that there's real evil out there, and even if we come at it from different angles, we can take the same path as far as in the physical world doing something about it and taking human action, as our Mises catchphrase goes. Got to make sure we plug that.
Yeah, and as everyone knows, I am cucked off the bird for now, maybe permanently, we'll see, but you're not going to find me on Twitter anymore. You can find me on Facebook and on YouTube and on Apple, Spotify, like all the RSS feeds. I'm on all those. But I have a link in the description to my Odyssey. Please go follow me there. And then I've also got a link to my Facebook and my YouTube channel, not to my YouTube channel. What am I talking about? We're on YouTube. But I've also got a link to everyone's Twitter who is in the conversation and everyone who has a YouTube channel. So you can go down there to find them. I will be live streaming tomorrow with Micah Dank. And then I have Sal the Agorist on Tuesday, and then Popular Liberties coming back on Friday next week. So stay tuned for those, and we will catch you all on the next episode.